Hi, everyone. Sean Wellman with Secure Cyber, and we just got done with another great session at the Go Cyber Collective. And today I have Dr. Danny Robinson here from University of Dayton. And you had a great session on what I would consider human factors and security awareness training. Can you just give us a summary of kind of what you talked about? Just kind of boil it down a little bit.
Sure. One of the things about phishing training in particular is that there's an assumption that people get caught because they don't know enough about phishing. But the truth of the matter is that the reason that people get caught for phishing a lot of times is because of the way that they process information and because of the fact that they've been conditioned to click on links when they see them. So when a person's multitasking, they miss cues that would help them know when they were under attack.
Right.
And they also click out of habit because they've clicked so many links.
Sure.
And they also, as they're reading through a message, as soon as they figure out that this is something that isn't too big of a request of me, a lot of times they just go ahead and comply with the request because it's easier than going through the cognitive machinations of figuring out what they should do.
Right. And, one of the things that you brought up was this whole gorilla thing. And, there was can you explain that? I've seen the graphics before of people playing basketball and then like a gorilla walks right through the middle of the group and like nobody noticed it.
Yeah. It's a great study and a great book by Simon and Chabris. They did a study where they had people playing basketball and they weren't playing a game, they were passing a basketball, and there was 3 or 4 kids wearing white shirts and 3 or 4 kids wearing black shirts. And so the people watching the videos were instructed to count the number of times the people in white shirts passed the basketball. And they moved around and made it complicated, a little more difficult to do than you might think. But they had to ignore the people in the black shirts passing the basketball. So at the end of the video, they ask them, hey, how many times did the white shirts pass it? And if you paid a lot of attention, you might find out it was 14 times.
Okay.
And then the second thing that they would ask them after they ask them how many times, they'd say, did you notice anything unusual about the game? And half the people say no, they didn't notice anything unusual about it. And the truth of the matter is, in the middle of the game, a person wearing a gorilla costume, 6 feet tall, walks through the middle of the game, stops in the middle, beats on his chest, and then walks out the other side or whatever. And half the people miss that. So the obvious implication there is that if you tell people to look for these cues or look for these clues in an email message, the problem is that if they're focusing on something else, they'll miss those kinds of cues.
Right. And you brought up something very interesting too. You basically said everybody in the room knows, and everybody listening to this and watching this today knows what their email pattern looks like. So even without the training, I believe that the majority of people by now know what a good email looks like and what doesn't, right? Because you know your pattern. That was interesting to me. And I think the other thing that was interesting was that I believe we're just going about security awareness training in the opposite way that we should be going after it. Because talk a little bit more about the whole part where we're humans, right? So if you just continue to tell us the thing that's going to happen bad every time we do it, we'll eventually stop responding to that or just not do it. If you have to, and you'll talk about it, you have to give people the idea that they can do something and there's going to be something good that's going to happen.
Yeah. One of the things that happens in training is we assume that the reason that people are susceptible is because they're not sufficiently motivated to protect themselves. And so we give them the training and we tell them in the training, hey, this is how often people get phished and this is the terrible consequences of being phished. And so the end user, learns that information, and then we expect that they'll defend themselves from that point forward because it's in their own best interest to protect themselves. But what ends up happening is if the end users don't feel efficacious, if they don't feel like they can perform the task or the solution that you're requesting, they're not going to try it. People don't perform behaviors that they don't feel that they can be successful at. And as a consequence of that, if your training just points out, failure, 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 or if your training doesn't help the person feel like, well, this is something that I can do, I'm sure that I can do this, then your training is not going to be as effective as it could be. One key to this that people forget is that there's not really one solution or one recommendation that fits all your end users. For example, you can ask some people to look for threats or writing errors or things like that in there, and then use that as a cue to know that you're being phished.
Okay.
But there are other people that all they have to do is they have to think about it and say, this email somehow seems strange to me. Maybe what seems strange to them is that they've never gotten an email from that person before. Or maybe it comes in at 4:30 on Friday and they're asking you to wire money to some other country or whatever. Well, if that doesn't happen to you, on a regular basis, that little light bells should go off in your head. And so if you can teach people that all they have to do is trust their feelings a little bit, in addition to knowing some of these rules, that they can better defend themselves and they can feel like they can be successful at doing it, because everybody feels like they can trust their feelings.
Sure. Yeah. And we were talking before the show. I mean, that's when I'm talking in public about stuff like this and people go, well, what do we do if security awareness training is stagnant? What do we tell the users? And, I've always told people when I teach to them, slow down, which lines up with the whole gorilla walking through multitasking, right? Mm-hmm. And by the way, nobody can multitask. We're just awful at that, right? So if you think you're that doesn't work. And then I tell them to listen to their gut, which is the trust their feelings thing. So, if it feels bad and it looks bad, it probably is, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And like you say, you don't have to be an expert in cybersecurity to know that this is something that doesn't normally happen in an email message for me. And as a consequence of that, I need to notify somebody. And the underlying, one of the underlying principles that's important here is that the people in IT staffs and IT departments have to make sure that they develop sufficient relationships with the end users, that those people are willing to contact them.
Right.
And everybody's not going to be best friends. That's not necessary. But the end user needs to recognize that whoever they talk to when they call over to the IT department, that person's going to help them. They're not going to ridicule them, and they're going to make sure that they help them to any way that they possibly can. Obviously within reason.
Sure.
And when people feel that way, then you don't have to know anything except to know that something's amiss, and I better call. And if you call and it isn't a phishing attack or whatever it is, the person needs to ensure that when they get off the phone that they feel like they did the right thing by checking. It's much better to check than it is to just bluster, run forward into a trap.
Well, and I think all of us at this point are familiar with it. If you see something, say something, right? That's something that Homeland Security has definitely, enforced over time. And, if we had to end out this conversation with a couple things, one is I think IT managers and folks out there need to definitely redesign their programs a little bit and not be designing things in a way where you're trying to figure out how to snare them the most, right? How can I make that phishing email so good that they get caught? It's not about trying to get them caught all the time, because we have to have, this counter reinforcing message that something good is going to happen, right? You can do this. You can get through this. You can identify that phishing email. But also, just like you said, when you call into the help desk, the users have to be empowered. You use the term, these are frontline defenders. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I've even used the term human firewall. The folks that are at the keyboard are our last and first line of defense. So we've got to really redesign and really look at these training programs in general. And I say program because that's what it is to me. It's setting up. It's not checking a box. We talked about too, why do people have security awareness training in the first place? Why does stuff like Know Before and Cywareness and all these phishing training why do they even exist in the first place? I don't think they exist for the right reasons. I don't think they actually exist to train somebody. I think they exist because on the insurance form, when you sign up to go for cyber insurance, it says that you have to have a training program and you have to fish your users. And I think that's why they have it. I don't actually think people do anything with the scores per se. There might be some people out here that are listening that say, hey, I look at the scores, I make business decisions based on that, but I think you're in the minority. I'd be really interested in the viewers to comment and on the YouTube channel, what are you doing with the training? How do you, what do you do? So I really think what you're talking about is just a complete revamp, because this is human factors, and most IT managers, CISOs, CIOs, don't go through some type of psychological training and minor in psychology to really understand thought learning and those types of things.
Yeah, in large part, what you're really trying to do with cybersecurity is you're trying to develop your organization into what they call in the literature a highly reliable organization, and that means that anytime anybody sees or suspects something, that they act on it, and that everybody in the organization has the ability to stop things from happening or make things happen. So when somebody notices and voices a concern, things have to happen because of that. It's really important that that happens that way, and it's also important that in that idea of a highly reliable organization, that the person that's maybe getting phished doesn't have to necessarily call IT as the first thing. Maybe they can just holler over a cubicle to somebody else who's a little more sophisticated,
right.
And rather than having it being like, oh, geez, this is blame, shame for not knowing this stuff. There are people in the organization who will be better at it than other people, and they can say, yeah, that does concern me. Maybe we ought to call IT, or yeah, I got that too. Just delete it or whatever it is,
One last thing before we stop, just 'cause I could talk to you for a long time because it really interests me. What do you say for the IT department out there? So a user gets the phishing training, right? So they get the phish and they're looking at it, and then they start warning everybody about the message.
Oh yeah, when we did phishing training, when we first started doing it, we found out that there were people that had angered. They thought we were wasting their time by sending them an email message. And so what they would do is when they would notice that we were sending out a phishing training message, they would broadcast an email to everybody that they knew or everybody in their school or whatever, and they'd say, hey, they're doing it again. Don't fall for this. They're asking you this or this or this, and
right.
so they thought they were really sticking it to the man. But what's so funny about that is we'd go back and we'd tell them, we really, really appreciate that. You're really, really helping the cause. And what we found out was that that's what regular end users do too. They would send those same email messages to their friends, and they would say, hey, there's something going on or whatever it is. And we say, that's great. If everybody would take care of themselves best they can and try to take care of somebody else, we could reduce a lot of phishing.
That's awesome. All right, Dr. Danny Robinson, I really appreciate you. University of Dayton, your talk was excellent. And if you're interested, the Go Cyber Collective meets the third Wednesday of every month here at the Tyler Technologies building. So if you're in the Dayton, Ohio area, it's gocybercollective.org to register for the next session in October. Free breakfast. What can possibly go wrong there, as well as great networking, and we've also got training sessions that have started popping up now. So there's on-site learning, cybersecurity training available as well. So check it out, and thanks again for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you.